Hey there, it's Tanya from Azteco. Now, there is a time and place for strategic thought leadership. However, in this video series, we would like to focus on action leadership, the people who are driving Bitcoin consumer adoption by making it easier and simpler to use. And so I am delighted to welcome here today a very special guest, Stephan Livera, the Bitcoin podcaster. Stephan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me.
So please share with the people a little bit more about who you are and what's your background.
So I am a Bitcoin podcaster. I host a talk show, and I try to make it an educational show that many people listen to just to learn about Bitcoin and economics, as well as liberty-focused topics as well, things that are important or interesting for libertarians. In terms of my professional background, back in Australia when I was there, I was working as a chartered accountant, and I had an accounting and finance background. But on the side, I also had this interest in Bitcoin and Austrian economics and liberty. And so that sort of led me down the pathway to starting this podcast. And so that's probably the main thing I'm known for nowadays, which is just the podcast.
And what inspired you to start the Stephan Livera Podcast? And what's been your favorite episode thus far?
So at the time I started my show, in 2018, around July or June, around then, I was frustrated with the sheer amount of altcoin and blockchain podcasts, and there was just a lot of shilling and random projects, and there just wasn't a lot of focused information that could take a person who was new and help them. Obviously, it's a different environment now. Here we are in 2025, January. But at that time, there weren't a lot of Bitcoin-focused shows that were trying to educate people. There just weren't that many. And so that's really why I did it. In terms of memorable episodes for me, probably my episode with Guido Hulsmann, because I really enjoyed his book, The Ethics of Money Production. It's not directly a Bitcoin book, but it's a book that really, I think, helps explain how we got here in terms of what is the problem with fiat currency. Because I believe if you don't understand the problem of fiat currency, you won't see why Bitcoin is the solution. Otherwise, it just looks like we're just a bunch of random internet coin nerds or whatever. But actually, no, there's a real reason for this, and there's a reason for Bitcoin to exist, and you need to know that.
And then how is it that you decided to make Bitcoin easy, both for the people who were new and also the skeptics at the time?
So it was just a combination of things. It was things like I would see false narratives being put onto mainstream media. I would see things just going unchecked, right? So as an example, people might put out some nonsense about, Bitcoin and the environment impact, or Bitcoin and deflation, or various things. And so for me, it was just driven by trying to put out the correct narrative. So I would often interview experts from different fields to help answer some of those criticisms, or on the other hand, to educate people, to help them see a world or understand something that they didn't know before. The idea is that if you are an intelligent layman, that you could listen to the show and understand a little bit more and actually start your own journey of learning, as many people have, just by listening to these different podcasts and reading articles and so on, that then causes them to go and actually do further study and start using Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin, or even working in the Bitcoin industry themselves.
And so in your opinion, and kind of following up on the same narrative, do you think it will be individuals, businesses, or governments that are going to drive Bitcoin adoption in the future?
I think really it's all of them, but I will say this. I think even when we think of businesses or government, it's actually individuals inside those entities who do the heavy lifting. Even if you think about large corporate entities, whether they are public entities or family offices, or whatever, there are individuals inside that entity who had to first, let's say, take the orange pill, and then they were able to go and evangelize and advocate inside their organization to make it happen. And I believe that will be true whether you are a business or a government. But yeah, the way I see Bitcoin, it's a bottom-up revolution. It's a bottom-up change in money. It's the future of money, and it'll be driven by individuals.
And so can Bitcoin improve financial inclusion for unbanked communities from what you've seen in your experience throughout these years?
So yes and no. I think broadly yes, but I think it's one of those things where in order to really benefit from Bitcoin, you will be best off if you can actually save. And so it's easier to save if you have higher income and higher net worth. And so that's one factor. But I will say there are certainly circular economy communities. There are certainly people who use Bitcoin peer-to-peer. There are people who maybe they are not direct on-chain users of Bitcoin, but they are, let's say, kind of like a retail customer sitting on top of a Bitcoin bank per se. And they are benefiting from Bitcoin in that way, that they're able to trade. They're able to at least start the journey, even if they're not able to be a fully self-sovereign, holding their own keys Bitcoin user.
And then, so following up a little bit on the general public and just like the average person, how important do you think then that Lightning Network plays into Bitcoin's future in people's day-to-day life using Bitcoin?
So Lightning Network has, I guess, it's evolved and shifted over the years. In the early days, I think people had a different idea that it would be used by lots and lots of retail users. Now it's almost like there's almost like a B2B side of it, and there's almost a sense of a lot of people are using services that in turn use Lightning. And Lightning is being used as the common language between different layers and different, let's say, exchanges, custodians, or different parties in the space. Of course, the adoption is not where I would wish it would be. I would wish it was more, but I still think it is rapidly growing. So I believe it is essential to the future of being able to make Bitcoin transactions faster and cheaper and more practical. But coming back to that same question, not everybody's going to be able to self-custody Bitcoin. I wish more could, but I think that's just sort of the reality that we're dealing with.
And so what advice would you give to someone who wants to help spread Bitcoin adoption, whether it be to the community, to their friends, maybe to a government? Like, what's the best way of going about it?
So there are different ways, and I think it's difficult for me to give a one-size-fits-all answer, but as an example, you could start a meetup group. You could write articles. You could do your own podcast. People can find their own ways to advocate. Of course, share, Bitcoin material with your friends, right? Whether that's my podcast or other material. I'm not that fast. It's just more about trying to grow adoption, because I think the faster that we can help more people understand Bitcoin, the better things will be. Now, at the same time, don't be overbearing, right? Like, it's don't push it onto people when they're not ready for it. So I think there's a delicate sort of balance that you have to find there of, trying to advocate for this thing without sort of ramming it down people's throats when they're not ready for it. And you understand that over time you sort of start to learn who is willing to hear this message and who is not so open to it, and maybe they're just not ready for this yet.
And so just wanted to get a little bit of your insights, because just recently the President of the United States had mentioned that Ross Ulbricht is receiving a pardon, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. This is something that just happened a couple hours ago.
Yeah, this is great news. I think all libertarians and Bitcoiners are happy about this, at least most of the ones that I know, very happy about this. This has been a big, long-time issue that the treatment of Ross by the US government was simply unjust. The sentence was double life plus 40 years with no chance for parole. It was just completely ridiculous. And there were a lot of flaws in the way his case happened, and there were just a lot of issues. So I think it's a great thing. It's obviously, congratulations to him, and well done to his mother Lynn, as well as all the other people who were pushing for him to get out. I also think broadly, if we zoom out a little bit, I think it also speaks to how Bitcoin as a movement is growing in strength and power and political, political power. And that may also translate to other wins for Bitcoiners, whether that's things like, taking away capital gains tax, or staving off the worst of the anti-crypto army, or the sort of choke point 2.0, these kinds of concerns that may have been there in the past. So hopefully it's an indicator of more good things to come for Bitcoin from a policy perspective, even if imperfect.
What is a question that you wish people asked you more? And I ask this because very famous podcaster, a lot of people listen to what you say. And so what is a topic that you wish people usually brought up more to your attention?
I don't think I have something off the top of my head. I will say there's a natural journey that people go down. And so obviously I can't deny it. Number Go Up draws many more people in than any podcast we do or any article we write or whatever we do. Number Go Up really just massively dominates. And so I see the challenge as, how do we help those people who come in at the top of the funnel? How do we get them to sort of learn about the ethos and why you should self-custody, why you should run your own Bitcoin node and connect your wallet to your own node, and these kinds of questions, or around things like why is it important to try to make sure Bitcoin stays decentralized? I think these are some of the things that are worthwhile thinking about. Not everybody is willing to go there, because for some people, they want to buy it on a terminal and sort of let somebody else deal with it for them. So that's probably the challenge that many of us face in trying to sort of help people down that journey to understand that, okay, there's actually more self-sovereignty on offer than what you might first realize.
And then for our final question, what do you hope people will say about your work in Bitcoin 50 years from now?
Well, I hope I helped educate people, and I hope people found the show valuable and useful. I think in the early years of my show, I think there was just a lot of bad information out there, and so I think I hope I was able to help with that. Of course, it's always difficult. There are times where, hey, we get things wrong, but I hope I got more things right than I got wrong.
Thank you so much for your time, Stephan. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.